Dan Bilzerian is quite literally about to go bankrupt. The only money he has coming into his companies is investor money, and he has tons of money going out for business expenses and potentially dubious personal expenses. So much so that the expenditure actually massively outweighs the money coming in and the revenue. Dan has repeatedly misled his followers about the success of his companies, where his money truly came from, his success at the sport of poker, the ownership of the property that he lives in, the regular changes in management of his companies, and much, much more. Today I'm going to be explaining who Dan Bilzerian actually is, where his money really came from, why his companies are doing so poorly, and why Dan is literally just about to go bankrupt. Also, please remember that everything I say in this video is just my opinion. I'm not a lawyer or a qualified financial advisor. I'm just some guy that makes videos and puts them on the internet. This video isn't meant to slander or bring into disrepute the name of Dan Bilzerian or any of his companies. I'm just simply reporting on recent events that I found in the public domain on the internet, and therefore it's not necessarily facts. So firstly, who is Dan Bilzerian? Well, you might recognise him. He has 32.5 million followers, and his Instagram is centred around three main things: girls, guns, and, well, ganja. He's a 39-year-old poker player from California. He's also the founder of Ignite Brands, which we'll talk about later. Their website sells e-cigarettes and CBD products, and the business is largely a failure, losing a whopping $50 million in 2019 alone. He's also been embroiled in a number of legal battles for kicking a model in the face, for throwing another model off the roof into a pool where she broke her foot, and he's currently being sued for wrongful termination of the previous vice president of Ignite Brands. So where did Dan get all of his money from? Well, he claims that he won all of his money playing poker, and he claims to have won up to $50 million in a single year. So let's check the top 10 list of highest earning poker players. In at number 1 we have Bryn Kenny, with career earnings of around $56 million. And in at number 2 we have, oh hang on, that's not Dan. We've got Justin Bonomo with lifetime career earnings of $49 million. Actually, Dan's name doesn't feature in this top 10 list or any other legit top 10 list that I can see. Maybe he won it all playing private games, because after all, if he'd won all of this money in live poker games, he'd have a very recognisable name and recognisable face, like Daniel Negreanu. He'd be like the Cristiano Ronaldo of poker, for example. So maybe he won it all playing privately in super high stakes games, like playing a friendly game of poker with Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger and other wealthy billionaires. But actually, how would he have got an invite into these games? Before his claim to fame and his rise to fame, he would have just been a regular average person. How would he have been able to sit in and build these relationships with affluential billionaires? Bill Gates isn't exactly going to invite little old Jimmy from down the road, who has no money, to sit in on his poker game for free with the chance of winning $50 million from him now, is he? So that seems a little bit far-fetched as well. If you're enjoying the video so far, be sure to smash the like button down below, as this really helps out my channel with the YouTube algorithm. What seems more likely is that the money came from his corporate raider, corporate takeover specialist father, Paul Bilzerian, who was convicted of 9 counts of stock fraud and spent 13 months in prison in 1991, after the owner of Jeffries & Co., Boyd Jeffries, testified against 3 individuals, including Paul. Paul Bilzerian made hundreds of millions from his attempted takeovers of companies like Cluett Peabody, Hammermill Paper, Allied Stores and more. He also spent $100 million on Florida real estate and sold it all soon after, as the property prices boomed in the 1980s. Paul probably made well over $100 million from his attempted takeovers, as obviously he wouldn't be spending 100% of his money on real estate. He'd probably have some to put into stocks, some to keep in his savings, some more for other business ventures, and probably some money left lying around as spending money. In 1989, Paul was found guilty of 9 counts of stock fraud for not appropriately filing Schedule 13Ds and for breaching Section 10B. Paul was ordered to repay his illegal profits, which were determined to be around $62 million. In the past 25 years, the SEC has only reclaimed around $3.7 million from Paul, as he declared bankruptcy short after being found guilty, and therefore his assets haven't been found if he still owned them. Now there's all sorts of sketchy goings on here as well. Paul's wife Terry was ordered by the SEC to sell their family residence, which she did. She sold the 28,000 square foot mansion with an indoor basketball court and 2 lakes, once nicknamed the Taj Mahal of Florida, for an unusually low price of $2.5 million to an overseas partnership. 3 weeks later, Terry's parents actually purchased the 99% ownership in that overseas partnership, and well, I guess Paul and his wife Terry got their family residence back. Let's not forget that Paul is an incredibly smart man. Any old idiot can't just make hundreds of millions of dollars raiding Wall Street from people that have been to Harvard, Stanford, MIT and other top universities. So I don't think it would be beyond Paul to create some kind of overseas kids trust fund with hundreds of millions of dollars that he's made throughout his career for his children. But now back to Dan. How's his company Ignite doing? Well, with revenues of $10 million in 2019 and revenues of $3 million so far for the first half of 2020, not too bad. Maybe if he keeps up those returns, then somewhere way down the line, he'll have as much money as his dad. But the main downside to Ignite is the expenditure. The company generated $10 million of revenues for 2019, but a whopping $75 million in expenditure. Most of that expenditure is split between marketing expenditure and general expenditure. Again, most of this general expenditure is salary costs for Dan and his employees, consulting costs, potentially for his father or for an overseas consulting company maybe, and travel costs of a whopping $1 million. Now the crazy thing with all this expenditure is that a lot of it is paid to related parties. So companies that are either owned by Dan or some of the other directors or their family members. The company pays $200,000 in lease payments, probably to Dan, $381,000 in salary reimbursement, again, probably to Dan. There's also $1.3 million in business expenditure, probably incurred by Dan, $300,000 in marketing fees, to Dan, and $360,000 in travelling expenditure, again probably incurred by Dan. The company also took a massive write-down of inventory of around $3 million, which is basically where they've decided, oh, you see that inventory over there? That $3 million of inventory? Yeah, it's old stuff that probably won't sell and it's worthless. The company also took a massive write-down on goodwill as well. When the company listed on the stock exchange, it was a reverse acquisition and it was acquired by a different company that paid way more for Ignite than the company was actually worth in its assets, and therefore had to take a write-down because, well, Ignite isn't profitable. Taking a look at the balance sheet, we can see that the company has a net loss reserve of $83 million, which basically means since its inception, it's not made any money and it's lost $83 million. And the only reason that the company has been dug out of this hole is because of that $82 million of shareholder investment. They also have a long-term loan facility of around $18 million, short-term loans of around $4.5 million, lease payments of around $4 million a year, but they do have around $6 million of inventory, which actually is more than half a year's worth of sales. So I wonder if any of that is old stuff as well. Looking at their cash flow, most of the money that came in from the year was as a result of the listing, also that $18 million loan facility. Most of the expenditure that they made during the year was obviously on that general and marketing expenditure that I spoke about earlier. Now the good thing though is that these financial statements have actually been audited, which means that there should be no rubbish in there. There should be no sneaky expenditure snuck in there, and there should be no overinflated assets in there either. Although interestingly, the financial statements of Ignite haven't been audited by one of the big accounting firms like PwC, KPMG, Ernst & Young or Deloitte. These companies have over $1 billion in revenue and thousands of employees. Instead, they're audited by a tiny little firm called Davidson & Company, with revenues of around $20 million. Now, smaller companies like these don't typically audit larger companies because, well, they don't really have the employees and the workforce to be able to do it in an efficient manner. It seems that Davidson & Company only has around 94 employees in all of its offices in all of its departments. I work for a UK accounting firm that has much more revenue than £20 million a year or $20 million a year, and even we don't really audit too many public companies because, well, again, we just don't have the staff force required to be able to do it. But, I don't know, it might be very different in the US, so I can't really comment on that. But again, please remember that I don't work for Ignite, or I don't do any of the accounting for Ignite either. So I don't really know what's in any of their expenditure. It's only just what's written in the SEC filings. And I also don't really know how difficult it would be to audit Ignite either, so I can't comment on that. I can only see what you see in the SEC filings. I'm just pretty good at reading what's in those accounts. Now, if you thought all of that about Dan's father and the performance of the company was pretty dark and pretty bleak, well, this is where it gets even worse. The ex-vice president of Ignite, Curtis Heffernan, is currently suing the company after claiming that Dan fired him for not approving his extravagant business expenditure. Apparently he spent $15,000 on a ping pong table, $40,000 on a rock climbing wall, around $800,000 in yacht rental, around $120,000 for a 2-night stay in the United Kingdom, and then tried to tell Curtis that all of these expenses were business expenditure and not his expenditure, and that it needed to go through the company. Apparently he also asked Curtis to classify the $1 million PPP COVID loan as sales, to make his sales look even bigger than $10 million. Now, this might have been a miscommunication between Dan and Curtis, or it might just be because obviously Dan isn't a qualified accountant and might not fully understand accounting concepts, but obviously I can't say for sure. Now, it's unknown for sure whether this crazy business expenditure actually made it into the company, or what else is sitting within the $22 million of marketing expenditure. But that number does sound very, very high for marketing expenditure, considering I've never seen any like Ignite TV adverts, and they've never sponsored any football games or any big promotions like that. They kind of just advertise on Instagram a little bit and sponsor a few social media influencers. These are all currently just claims made by Curtis, and actually Dan hasn't been found guilty of any wrongdoing. Dan has actually combated these accusations and called them ridiculous, and that actually Curtis was fired for being incompetent and negligent. This could absolutely be true, but it sounds a little bit weird. Curtis has spent the past 30 years working for absolutely giant companies like Procter & Gamble, one of the biggest personal health companies with over $70 billion in sales last year. He's also worked for giant companies like Cadbury's and other huge companies. He's also won contracts with some of the biggest stores like Costco, Walmart and other major players. It just seems a little bit weird that only now, 30 years down the line, Curtis has been found to be incompetent and negligent, and not any other time before that by giant companies like Procter & Gamble, only right now. Maybe he's just gotten away with it for the past 30 years and no one ever really thought to check. Let me know what you think down in the comments below about Dan, his father and the Curtis Heffernan lawsuit. Now, the way I look at it, there's a lot of fake gurus on the internet that flaunt their wealth on social media but don't really make any money or any profit in their companies, and it seems that Dan could potentially be heading this way as well, flaunting all his money for the gram but not really making any money. All in all, it seems that so far Ignite aren't really doing too well and could be well on the road to bankruptcy. They've continued the similar suit in 2020 so far with around $3.2 million of revenues in Q2 with $8 million of expenditure. The company is currently running at a loss for the first 6 months of the year of around $16 million. It will be very interesting to see whether the company runs out of cash shortly or whether it can raise more from investors. It'll also be very interesting to see what happens as a result of the Curtis Heffernan lawsuit, and I'll be sure to keep you all updated. As always guys, if you've enjoyed this video, be sure to check out some of my others. Alternatively, subscribe to the channel and ding the notification bell, because that way you'll be alerted when I upload a new video. Cheers!